Good morning and welcome to the Coffee Chat, where we talk about machine learning and natural language processing in the previous week. And this week is for September 29th, 2022 to October 6th, 2022. I'm Dr. Rachel Tapman, and my streams, and this is also a podcast now, by the way, and podcasts are for anyone who cares about language technology and other people. And as we usually do, I'm going to talk about things separated by topic and category. So we'll start off with research from the week, a lot of preprints this week. And then we'll talk about practical stuff, news for language technologists, and then politics, so legislation, court cases, government actions, basically, and then ethics. Examples of projects that I think are especially against my personal ethics or especially in line with my personal ethics. And then we always end up with a little bit of fun right at the end to end on a high note, because especially the ethics section, it can get pretty heavy. So that's the plan for the stream/podcast. And because it is now going to be in an audio only format as well, I'm going to try to do a bit of a better job doing audio descriptions of visual things. All right, first up, you've probably already heard about this. So this is from Meta AI, aka Facebook. And it is their system, Make a Video, an AI system that generates videos from text. So this is a multimodal extension of the vast amount of generative work that's been done from text prompts recently. So, of course, originally text generation from text, like GPT-3, all of those other, things, all of those other large language models. And then, one sec, I just want to make sure my captions are working. Pop to the end there. Yes, excellent. Captions are working. And then there was, DALL-E related systems doing generation of images from text, and now a generation of videos from text, Stable Diffusion, another well-known system. Which, if you've been on the channel for a while, you probably can guess that I'm not a huge fan of this. But there we are, they done it. So we'll talk about this system a little bit later on, and particularly the data used to train the system. There are some sort of question marks around IP, intellectual property around these, about the training data, because of course Meta is a company, so it's commercial use, and a lot of the data was explicitly licensed not for commercial use. So we'll talk about that again. And right now I'm just looking at some of the examples, which you may have seen online. So it's things like a horse drinking water, somebody painting with a paintbrush, an alien spacecraft landing, and a dog wearing a superhero coat flying through the air. And they're all, if you've seen a lot of computer generated images, you can see the silhouettes are slightly off. The transition from frame to frame does not, abide by, particularly when you're looking at animals, the laws of anatomy. So that's out there now. Hey, Robbie, welcome to the stream. All right, next up. So this is a paper. Also, interestingly, Meta has released a lot of preprints this week. They haven't released any published papers that I ran across. Robbie says, this is the power of computer vision. Yeah. Seems like one of those things with sort of limited commercial applications, but lots and lots of potential malicious ones, unless, of course, the commercial application that you're interested in is getting attention and press releases for your company, in which case I think the system has been a rousing success on that particular axis. So this paper is from Computational Linguistics, which is a journal run by the Association of Computational Linguistics. The paper is Last Words, Boring Problems, Last Words is a section. Boring Problems Are Sometimes the Most Interesting by Richard Sproat, that's S-P-R-O-A-T, from Search Google Japan. And this is a response to another position paper. So position papers are basically like, this is what I think about that. And the response is to a position paper written by Yoshio Bengio, Jeffrey Hinton, and Yann LeCun. Yann LeCun at Facebook, of course, Yoshio Bengio at Apple. I don't know where Hinton is right now. And they were making the case, quote, that symbolic methods are not needed in AI, and that while there are still many issues to be resolved, AI will be solved using purely neural methods. And the whole paper, which I think is pretty interesting, and I'd recommend you read if you're interested in it, is talking about the fact that text normalization, right? So taking text input and transforming it in a way so that it's more consistent across the things that it's across, is not solved in a neural framework by any stretch of the imagination. And one thing that really stuck out to me here is that we were still using the same basic approach to text normalization, Ebden and Sprout 2014, Sprout being the author of this paper, that we had been using at Bell Labs in the mid-1990s, Sprout 1997. So basically the person who has been working on this topic really, really closely and is definitely open to neural methods, it's discussed in the paper, has found that they're just not useful, right? So here is an example, and this is particularly relevant to what we talked about on Tuesday. Alexi says, I remember some paper about Newtonian physics inference or something like that. Maybe it will help with realism. Maybe. I mean, again, my question is, what is the actual helpful use case of this technology? Like, why do we want it? What is this adding to the world besides additional threat vectors? Especially given how expensive it is, I think that's a reasonable question to ask. Thus, numeral 1, numeral 2, numeral 3, numeral 4 might be expanded as 1,234. Given enough such data, the neural model can perform quite well in terms of overall accuracy, but it still made some disturbing errors. Numbers may be read wrong on occasion, a common sort of error being for it to be off by a power of 10, reading 100, 000, or 100,000 as 10,000. Or a measure expression that has not been sufficiently covered in the training data might be substituted with some other measure expression. So this is a class of neural errors that when I was working on speech recognition, I was particularly interested in, and it's the surprising non-human-like errors, right? And in this case, they are straight up wrong, right? If you're trying to read financial reports and your system is off by a power of 10, that is a big problem and reduces the utility of the system, particularly when it is unpredictable and unrecoverable when the system is off by a power of 10, right? So imagine I hand you a financial report and I'm like, hey, one of the numbers in here might be off by a power of 10. You have no way of figuring out it is without cross-referencing with additional data. That's kind of an issue. Also, I want to point out that this particular task, right, taking something written in numerals and writing it out in language is the default for most language technology. And when we looked at the Whisper paper on Tuesday, one of the things they did that just like was extremely surprising and upsetting, well, not upsetting, but like unnerving to me, is that they did the reverse. So they took anything that was written out in text as words that was a number and converted it into numerals, which again, very atypical for language technology. Alexi says, just pushing forwards models to be more general. Yeah, referring to the discussion about the contribution of the text-to-video system, I am not yet convinced that that is actually a useful or helpful goal, right? We talked about this a little bit in that sure, I can see the utility for companies from their point of view because it gives them a competitive advantage if everyone has to come to them to use their model that's prohibitively expensive to train. But I don't necessarily know that it means a better experience for the end users or developers, besides consolidation on a single framework that a private commercial entity controls, right? So I am not convinced that that is a goal, a good. Anyway, so this is a position paper. It goes into more depth. The term unrecoverable errors is from Zhang et al. 2019. And I think just a really good use case of a place where neural methods are just not as good as some of the existing rule-based methods. And while they can look like they are working, they do introduce a lot of breakingly bad errors. And I definitely don't think from having read the paper, Richard Sprout is saying that, hey, what we really need to do is like never use neural methods for anything. He's presenting this as a research dimension to look into by pointing out that like, hey, this isn't solved using this methodology. So Tom says, the use case for me in text to video is creating TikTok videos from scripts that people want to watch. Yeah, but the thing is, like, you know, I make videos. I don't think there's really any shortage of people who want to do the labor of making videos, right? So it's one of those things that I make the distinction between labor saving versus cost of labor saving. This strikes me as something that may be cost of labor saving, but not actually result in a better output. Anyway, so next, oh, I thought I'd change this so it pointed directly to the paper. Anyway, this is another preprint, also from Meta. Again, they just released a bunch of preprints recently. I guess they gave up on getting them published, or they decided that it wasn't worth getting them published. They'd get more attention doing it by press release. I don't know what it is. But it is specifically, the title of the paper is Entity Tagging, Extracting Entities in Text Without Mention Supervision. And it is by Christina Du, Kashyap Popat, apologies if I mispronounce anybody's names, Louis Martin, or maybe Louis Martin, and Fabio Petroni, all from Meta AI. And the sort of premise here is that, well, I'll read bits of the abstract and then talk about it in a little bit more detail. And I will say just one thing to know is that the code, data, and pre-trained models are available on GitHub. So detection and disambiguation of all entities in a text is a crucial task for a wide range of application. So basically, detecting all of the physical things that are talked about in a text, and for things like, if I was comparing three models, right, and I said, it is clearly the best choice, which of the three models it refers to would be disambiguation, of, in this case, of co-reference. Alexi says, I'm more talking about theoretical work. Combining text input and image video output was considered hard. There will come audio for these videos, then something else. Yep, again, like, why is this what we consider interesting and useful as a field? Nothing about science, or I mean, questionable whether or not machine learning counts as science, but nothing about a field of research is predetermined, right? What people work on and what people research is dependent on a number of factors, and a big one is what is getting attention, what is getting money. In ML, that really means money from private corporations, predominantly, because they have the most of it, or, you know, in other fields, things like grants, right? Like, what is the NSF, which is a large grant-making organization in the United States run by the federal government, what are they funding, right? If they're doing, you know, $10 billion towards cancer research, well, more people are going to work on cancer research because there's the money to do that research. So I think it's reasonable, if you haven't had a lot of experience working in a research community, to assume that there's just sort of like an obvious next thing that everyone will obviously do. But it's not predetermined, right? People are choosing what to spend their time on, and the research community as a whole is, you know, moving in one direction or another based on a number of forces, including outside funding, and it's not predetermined or, you know, necessary. Anyway, the typical formulation of the problem, so I'm reading again, i.e. entity linking, involves two stages: detect mention boundaries and link all mentions to a knowledge base. Tom says, I've heard arguments that you can change the order of technological advancement but not prevent it. So there is, okay, we'll get back to the research paper in a while. I think that there's I definitely don't think that you can prevent humans from coming up with new stuff. I think that that is just sort of a general thing that we like to do as a species. And I don't think that that's bad. But, you know, technology is not inevitable. And I know that there's a lot of people who will argue, right, that like the Enlightenment always had to happen exactly the way the Enlightenment happened, right? Or, you know, any specific technological innovation was inevitable. But that's just not the case, right? Right? Like there's a world nearby where DARPA never funded the internet and the internet just doesn't exist, right? There's a world nearby where social media is all extremely like forum based and like very focused on specific subdomains, right? There's a world nearby where smartphones never became a thing, right? And all of those things happened because of decisions that people made. And I think it is both ahistorical and also usually done with the goal of removing responsibility from particular individuals for their actions, which they know people may disagree with, to claim that something is inevitable, right? Like the process that's used to create synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, enormous change to the world as a whole. I don't think it was inevitable. I don't think it was inevitable that was that process, right? The use of plastics in commercial packaging. There was nothing inevitable about that. That was the result of business decisions made by companies run by people, right? I think that it's kind of dangerous, right, to claim that there's like, obviously this is the thing that's going to happen in the future. And again, just ahistorical. It's not how science works. It's certainly not how the history of science has worked. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, Robbie says the space war brought internet. Oh, the space race? There may have been some cross-pollination, but I don't think it was directly causal, is my understanding of sort of the early history of DARPANET. So certainly the United States being an imperial power and very dedicated to spending a lot of money on military advancements was for sure, you know, a factor there. But yeah, life isn't a video game. Technological process is neither deterministic. And I say process here, not progress, because I think it's also very dangerous to think that everything is better than everything that came before it. And I think that leads to the fallacy of like, hey, whoever is alive now is clearly better than whoever was alive in the past, and we're all clearly smarter than the people who came before us. And again, I think that's ahistorical. So anyway, we were talking about entity extraction. So they're saying that the previous example is, the previous approach is you look across the text, you span text spans, you know, identify which parts of the span refer to an entity, and you link those entities to mentions in a knowledge base. And they're saying that, hey, detecting mentions has long been, I'm reading now, has been considered a necessary step for extracting all entities in a piece of text, even if the information about a mentioned spans is ignored by some downstream applications that focus on a set of extracted entities. In this paper, we show that in some cases, detection of mentioned boundaries does not bring any considerable performance gain in extracting entities. Therefore, it can be skipped. So basically what they're doing is that they are not considering mentions of the entities and not linking them together. We find that these models achieve comparable performance when trained on both fully and partly annotated data sets. So that's the part that sort of perked my ears up, is like, oh, less data annotation. That sounds nice. Demonstrating that Git can extract disambiguated entities with strong performance without explicit mention boundary supervision. So yeah, I don't know how well this works. I would assume it's only in English. I could be wrong about that, but that's sort of my assumption. But if this does work, that could be very, very helpful in that you would only need to tag, you know, hey, this is the part of the text that mentions the entity sometimes, and the model would be able to extrapolate. So interesting work, could potentially be very impactful. Again, it's a preprint, so has not been peer reviewed. Question mark on that front. Yeah. Alexi says, Spacey used to have good NER. The team built it up was quite into classical linguistics, as far as I recall. Yes, there's definitely a lot of folks who have some linguistics background on the Spacey team. I think they still have good NER. They have a couple of new systems that they have released lately. I want to say they had one that was like super efficient. Let me see if I can find it. They definitely had a set of lighter weight embeddings. Spacey had a pretty good course for NLP. They did, yeah. I'm just sort of like poking around on the Spacey website. This is probably not a great use of the limited time that I have to be actually focused, but yes, they do have pretty good NER. All right, so that was from Meta. This next one is a call for papers if you are a researcher, and the journal is Empirical Software Engineering. I'm not super familiar with it, but it does, it's a Springer journal, and that's, you know, I guess it's an open question about whether or not Springer is a predatory company, but it is like an actual publishing company that doesn't exist just to take money from academics. It also exists to take money from academic institutions, so that's the distinction there. But they have a call for papers for a special issue on equitable data and technology. And they're looking for papers specifically on socio-technical and also algorithmic challenges. So I would, if you're interested in, well, never mind. I did not read this closely enough. The submission deadline was September 15th. I guess keep an eye out for this issue when it comes out. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if you had something that was like super, super relevant. If you maybe reached out to them and they didn't have quite enough papers, they might be interested anyway. So. Yep. All right. Next up, this is a blog post from Hugging Face, but it talks about some of the novel work that they did. Oh, is Abhishek at Hugging Face? Today I learned. And they talk about evaluation of large language models using a new toolset that they've built on the Model Hub. And they have, it's a big long blog post, but something that I thought was particularly interesting was this finding, which is that as the number of model parameters increase, right, so the bigger the model is, the more stereotyped the output was on the Wino bias data set. Which I think it's helpful to have additional, particularly additional transformer-based information on this, because some previous work on embeddings had shown the same thing, right? That if there is a stereotype or a bias in the model, in the training data, the larger a model is, particularly looking at embedding models. So the paper I'm thinking here is Men Also Like Shopping by, let me double check the authors on that for you. But the paper Men Also Like Shopping from a while ago found the same effect, that the larger the model was, the more it would not just capture, but expand stereotypical biases in the underlying data set. And it is by Jiyu Zhao, Tinlu Wang, Mark Yaxter, Vincent Ordenez, Kaiwei Chang. So that is the paper that I was thinking of. That's Zhao et al. 2017. So yes, good to have additional work on this problem with transformer-based language models, and especially very big transformer-based language models. So if you're working in the fairness space, I think this is going to be a helpful tool, and also a nice finding for their blog post that they did. So good work, team. And then the first author on this is Helen Gao. NGO. Alexi says, was there a paper with 224 different benchmarks for language models? Squad or Glue, maybe? Not Squad. Glue, maybe? Is what you're thinking about. But benchmarking, I would say, is not the same as more general model evaluation. Benchmarking is about performance on very specific tasks. More general model evaluation lets you go in and be like, hey, I have this question about model performance that I want to look at that may be more relevant to my use. Also, I don't think any of the Glue data sets or tasks specifically focus on bias. I could be wrong about that. If any of you know off the top of your head, let me know. All right, yet again, a meta preprint. And this is AudioGen, one word, GEN, textually guided audio generation by Felix Kruek and co-authors. There's a bunch of them. I'm not going to read them all. Sorry. Out of the FAIR team at Meta AI. And also there's some co-affiliations with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And the basic idea here is that you write a prompt like whistling with wind blowing, and then the audio is generated for that prompt. This I actually do think has a little bit more of a helpful use case than the video stuff, because sound effects and like especially very short very short, particularly if they sound particularly good, audio recordings are helpful and used in a range of applications where they are not being deceptive, right? So like, if any of you have watched many Japanese game shows, you'll be familiar with the genre where like something will happen and then you'll get a bunch of reaction shots and they'll all have, and replays, and they'll all have different, types of audio effects and little stingers and fun things, fun audio touches with them. So I am less worried about this than I am things like the video one we talked about. Give me a sec. Excuse me. So yeah, yet another preprint from Meta where they are doing generation from text prompts. This next one, so this is actually an Interspeech paper. Interspeech is one of the larger speech-focused conferences, and it's one of the sort of main publishing venues if you work on automatic speech recognition, or even in things like language technology, speech pathology, acoustics, perception. There's usually some like neuro stuff there as well. So it's a very diverse conference with a lot of people with a lot of backgrounds. Yeah. Tom says, that's a depressing result. I'd hope for the opposite. I'm assuming this is for that larger models are more stereotyped. I would hope that the model would be able to find real latent factors rather than using gender, race as a proxy. I mean, the issue here, right, is that models are really good at finding and extrapolating from, weak signal. And if there is a covariance between two things, even if it is for artificial reasons, the models will pick up on it and expand on it, right? That's why they're useful. But yes, I agree. It is a little bit sad to see. So this paper is by Yihuan Zhang and co-authors from the Multimedia Computing Group, Delft University of Technology, Delft, the Netherlands. And the paper title is Comparing Data Augmentation and Training Techniques to Reduce Bias Against Non-Native Accents in Hybrid Speech Recognition Systems. So non-native accents are particularly interesting and challenging in a speech recognition situation because two speakers, native speakers of a language who, share the same general dialect features are going to behave very like each other, right? So there's going to be a lot of consistency across speakers within a dialect group. However, non-native speakers, or L2 speakers, or LX, where X is the number of the language that you have learned, will have a lot more variation between them. And the variation is both due to the effects of the other languages that they speak, right? So a classic example of that is, a French speaker, when coming across the English word the, might say it as the, because th, that voiced or unvoiced, is not a segment that you have in French, so it's replaced with something similar. Sort of all speakers do this, and you can certainly learn not to do it. It's just challenging. A great example would be for example, for me, trying to learn tones in a tonal language. Extremely difficult. I'm very bad at it. And I know for the speakers of those tonal languages, it is painful to listen to. So non-native speakers have a lot more variety in their language use, both based on their native language effects, but also their fluency as a speaker and what they've learned really well and what they've learned really poorly, right? So me as a language learner, I tend to get the phonetics, tone set aside, pretty well, right? So it sounds pretty good, but vocabulary learning for me in particular tends to be very challenging. So as a non-native speaker, I will often have a lot of loan words that I've sort of shoved through the phonetic language filter of the language to try and make into basically calcs. So as a non-native language speaker, I would imagine I would get a lot of, let's say if I tried to use French ASR, I'd get a lot of issues because of that. So this is a paper working on that, and they were looking specifically at Dutch. And one thing that really stuck out to me on this paper is that they were looking at the effects on both read speech, so like sitting down and reading text, and also human-machine interaction conversational speech. And the big results are, though, individual data augmentation techniques did not always yield an improved recognition performance. The combination of all three did, right? So doing both speed and volume perturbation and pitch shift, right? So taking language input, speeding it up, slowing it down, making it louder, making it quieter, and then pitch shift is changing the fundamental frequency. So the chipmunks, right, in Alvin and the Chipmunks are pitch shifted up. They are higher than the speaker's voice, if that's a helpful reference for you. And then also doing fine tuning and multitask learning. And all of those data augmentations together helped. Which I think is just really interesting because data augmentation for speech is tricky and not super helpful. So I think overall just sort of an interesting study. I really like that they looked at both read speech and conversational speech. I really like that they looked at both model training techniques and data augmentation techniques. And then of course, non-native speakers of Dutch is a fairly small population in terms of numbers of paper written about them in NLP venues, so I think it's really nice to have that as well. So interesting paper. If you're working in the field, I would recommend it, and just to look at some sort of the results here. Doing all the perturbations got the best results. For fine tuning, they're also doing, I forget what this D was for. So there's two types of models, RNN and RD. Is that the HMM? DNN? Anyway, I don't remember what that's for. Anyway, so they did a bunch of experiments and found sort of general improvement, mainly based on the data augmentation. Next up. Oh, this is a really interesting paper. So this is an IEEE paper from the, which particular one was that? The 2022 IEEE conference, International Conference on Robot and Human Interactive Communication, or OR-MAN. The paper title is AI Bias in Human-Robot Interactions, an Evaluation of the Risk in Gender-Biased Robots by Tom Hitron, Hitron, and co-authors. And the thing that I found just very surprising and disheartening in this paper findings was that basically they had a... I'll just read the whole abstract. It's not that long. In order to understand the extent of threats brought about by biases in AI systems, we evaluated participants' response to a gender-biased robot mediating a debate between two participants, male and female, right? So there's a robot they trained to be sexist that was doing debate moderation between a male and female participant. The vast majority of participants did not associate the robot's behavior with the bias, despite being informed that the robot is based on human examples. So they were like, hey, just so you know, the robot might be a little bit sexist, where the robot was intentionally designed to be sexist. And the participants didn't see that it was, right? Participants attributed the robot's decisions to their own performance and used explanations involving gender stereotypes. Our findings suggest that robots' biased behavior can serve as validation for common human stereotypes. So, not only did the participants not notice that the robot was being sexist, but when they talked about why the outcome that was observed happened, they used common gendered stereotypes, right? So things like, women aren't good at debate, and that's why she lost, and not the robot was specifically designed to make sure that she lost. So that's horrifying. Anyway, good to know about. So when we talk about things like automation bias, right, where people are more likely to accept the results of an automated system and more likely to believe that it's impartial, including, say, Supreme Court justices, we'll talk about that a little bit later, here's a great example of them doing that. Even though they knew that there might be bias in the system, they didn't see it when it was there and when it was intentionally put there. So yeah, cool, very cool. Love that. I'm very happy that they were doing this research. I am very unsettled that that was the outcome. All right, and finally we have, you guessed it, another preprint from Meta. I should be fair, it's not just from Meta, it is also from the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science, Mosaic ML, and the Allen Institute for AI. The first author is Ophir, O-F-I-R, Press, like printing press, and the preprint title is Measuring and Narrowing the Compositionality Gap in Language Models. And basically what they're saying here is that if you are asking a language model to do like factual recall, sometimes it does okay. If you ask a language model to do factual recall that requires, a couple steps of reasoning, it does worse, and making the model bigger does not help with that, which I think is an interesting finding, right? So they call this the compositionality gap. And then they propose a solution, which is that basically you have the model have like a little conversation with itself, which they call self-ask, which has been done quite a bit by various people recently. And then finally, and this is the thing that stuck out to me about this paper, they use the sort of like intermediate questions and just take search engine results. They used Google to answer those questions to then try and figure out what to say next. So this is sort of an interesting thing where you are using a hybrid of a language model and also a search engine, basically treating a search engine like a knowledge base. It's sort of a very fuzzy, stochastic way, and it's kind of doing basically what a lot of folks have been doing previously with, again, knowledge bases and IR for question answering. So kind of interesting work. Interested to see where it goes. Again, it's a preprint. It has not been peer reviewed. So all right, and that is all of the research that we had. Whew. On to practical stuff. I'm gonna take a drink of coffee. And hopefully, for any of you who are listening to just the audio, it has been fairly easy to follow along with so far. Now we're going to move on to the practical stuff. Tom Wright says, the self-ask stuff sort of reminds me of reinforcement learning in a way. Is there anything there? Yeah, a little bit. Except it's not just querying the model itself and having a specific reward function, but yeah, I can sort of see like an iterative an iterative generative process within the model performance. I think the other big difference here between this and reinforcement learning is that this is happening at query time, and is not being used to train the model for output later on, which is what I would expect with a sort of vanilla reinforcement learning thing. So kind of similar, but also kind of different. All right, next up, practical stuff. This one again. So this is not a blog post, a newsletter from the AI Snake Oil newsletter, which is written by Sayesh Kapoor and Arvind Narayanan. Again, apologies if I'm saying that wrong. I'm sure many of you who are watching and listening have much greater fluency in the languages that those names are from than I do. And it is their newsletter, which I think is on Substack, yeah, it's on Substack, is related to their book, which is called AI Snake Oil. And this is a little checklist that they've written for journalists that draws on a lot of work from other people who've been working on the field to help them, you know, be a little bit less credulous. So yeah, I think it's helpful both for journalists and just also for people who are new to the field, right? So pitfall 1 is flawed human AI comparison, right? A false comparison between AI tools and humans that implies, thank you, Benson, AI tools and humans are similar in how they learn and perform, especially with the deep learning stuff and the neural terminology. I think this is very easy for people to fall into. Hyperbolic, incorrect, or non-falsifiable claims about AI, claims that are speculative, sensational, or incorrect. Sure are a lot of those. Bless. I tweeted something about something being hypothetical recently, and someone replied with a blog post being like, it's not hypothetical, it's going to happen in the next 10 years. And I was like, bless. I appreciate that. I appreciate the person chiming in on that, but if you're talking about what might happen in the next 10 years, that is in fact hypothetical. Which, like, I don't think it's bad to talk about, you know, hypothetical things and things that might happen, but you should know that that is what you're talking about, right? Yeah. Alexi says snake oil. Yep, exactly. Uncritically platforming those with self-interest, that is a big one. News articles often use PR statements and quotes from company spokespeople to substantiate their claims without providing adequate context or balance. Particularly smaller startups, they don't have a lot to lose and a lot to gain. So I've noticed that tends to be a big source of inaccuracies. Limitations not being addressed, so only emphasizing the benefits. And those are sort of the general classes. But if you're interested in reading this, again, the title is 18 Pitfalls to Beware of in AI Journalism. And for those of you who are listening to this, I have my Ko-fi link on the screen. It's ko-fi.com/rctatman. And if you would like all the links for everything that we talk about here, I send them out to people who support me monthly on Ko-fi. So obviously I can't, if I put the links in the chat and you're listening, you're not going to find them. The next one. So I know I talk a lot about like when not to use large language models, but I think this is a really good place to do that and a great use of the technology. So this is by Joel ? I don't know Joel's last name. I can't easily find it. But Joel, JOEL.tools, TOOLS is the website. And he was playing around with the Salesforce code generation language model and was using the model to highlight existing text by likelihood, right? So how surprised is it? So we have an example here of a big, you know, hunk of code. And there are various bits highlighted in them. Some of them are green, which is, quote, the AI is confused but doesn't have a good alternate suggestion, and those are, you know, variable names. Red, the AI has a suggestion that it likes better, and then gray, no notes. And then the sort of general thing that was interesting about this is that things that were marked as red, one of the things that was marked as red was in fact a bug, right? So this was a example when the output of the model disagreed with the text as written because it had seen a lot of examples that were similar but different, and was like, hey, there's, you know, a little oasis, if you will, in the latent space right over there. You're standing here on top of the sand dune. You should come over here in this oasis, which is where people tend to go. Just to give you a little bit of a kind of anthropomorphic example of why this might happen, whereas for the green things like variable names, it would be just like, well, this is just the middle of sand dunes. There's sand dunes in all direction. I have no idea where you want to be going, which makes sense because variable name should be surprising in a information theoretic sense. So yeah, I think this is a really good use of the model to identify spans that are surprising and that there are very popular alternatives to. So I think this type of fuzzy code checking is a really cool and interesting use of large language models, and 10 out of 10 would recommend. Nice use of the model by Joel here. And the title of this blog post is AI Found a Bug in My Code. So nice. The next one, unfortunately, I am sharing with you to strongly recommend you do not use or trust this. So this is a news article from the news site New Atlas, and by Richard Harity, published on September 28th, and the title is Pfizer pays almost $120 million for an app that detects COVID from a cough. I can tell you, as someone who has worked in both speech recognition and machine learning for many years at this point, that the likelihood that this is both accurate and precise enough to be useful is almost zero. I would not trust this at all whatsoever. So, yep, just, you know, be aware. So the trial found a system that could actually detect 92% of COVID cases solely from the sound of a cough, right? So you're like, oh, that accuracy is pretty good. The system also recorded 80% specificity, meaning that only 2 out of every 10 people screened received false positive results. This again is in, you know, a pilot study, probably a pretty, you know, pretty controlled environment sonically, and also 80% specificity for a highly contagious disease is not good enough. So yes, I would personally absolutely not use or trust this system. Again, just personally. All right, next up. Alexi says, I'm going insane, or did I just imagine that huge paper with 2,000 plus evaluation metrics for NLP models? Are you not talking about glue? You're not. So just like a list of metrics? There are a lot of metrics for different NLP models, but they tend to be model class specific. Thank you, Benson. Sorry, he's barky today. So like measures like perplexity only make sense for language models or other things that do, you know, surprisal quantification. Yeah, so there are definitely a lot of metrics, but what metrics are relevant for you and your use case are going to vary wildly by your use case. So like a blue or rouge, or I don't know, there's a lot of metrics. Not all of them are useful all the time. I'm not entirely sure what paper it is you are referring to. All right, next up, still on the practical side. This is a little ad, and I think it is helpful when talking about large language models and democratization. I think it's really helpful to talk about price tags. So let me read this tweet just straight, and then we can talk about it. And this tweet is by Jonathan Frankel. LLMs are for everyone. Own a GPT-3 trained on your data rather than renting a GPT-3 trained on a web crawl of Reddit. GPT-3 is not just trained on a... That is how they collected the training data, but that does make it sound like only Reddit is included in the training data, which is not the case. It was outbound links from Reddit. The text included in pages that were in outbound links from Reddit. The price is $450K US dollars. Email to try it. This is just the start. That doesn't use Mosaic ML speedups. Our goal is to do it for 100K soon. So, I don't know about you, but if I, think about my friend group and just count on my fingers how many of them have 450K to spend on a model that has sort of like a fun purpose, but not a lot of actual utility, the number of fingers I would be left with is very, very small. Even 100K, that's a lot of goddamn money. That is so much money. One sec. Let me just, US median income 2022. Oh, we wouldn't have that data yet. It'd have to be 2021. Let's see. Median US household income 2021. Let's just put some numbers on this. I think that'll be helpful. Okay, real median household income in 2021 was $7,784. This is more than the median household income for a US household for the 100K for a year. And for the 450, let me do some quick back of the envelope math. 6.5 times the median household income. Who is everybody, my dude? who is everybody? Because it's not most people, and it's certainly less than half based on the median income. Anyway, fascinating what people think is relatable. And just for more information about this person, from his Twitter bio, chief scientist at Mosaic ML, professor to be at Harvard, PhD, MIT CSAIL, cover at Robert T. Lang, I think that's a photo credit for that, making ML efficient for everybody, algorithmically, hiring. I appreciate reducing costs. I especially appreciate reducing compute, but this is quite the definition of everyone. Lexi says, the problem is now I'm not sure what paper I'm referring to. Oh, the one with a lot of evaluation metrics. Yeah. Alexi says, I remember some ML apps which use the sound of broken air conditioners to classify the problem a while ago. Or maybe I was imagining that as well. Oh, interesting. I feel like that would be probably more doable, right? Because there are a limited number of ways an air conditioner can break. It is perfectly ethical to break an air conditioner in a specific way to see what it sounds like. And if you get it wrong, oh no, the technician didn't have maybe the exact tool they needed, right? So like low cost to get it wrong. Like obviously you can't do that for humans, right? Like it would be wildly unethical to give somebody COVID to see if their voice changed. Hopefully nobody's thinking about doing that. Alexi says, don't look up median household income in Russia. Hey, Chrono Zero, welcome. Yeah, so again, US, very wealthy country. Anyway, just wild to me that I can't even put myself in the headspace where I would think that referred to everyone. But again, I think I did not get my PhD at MIT, so maybe we just run in different circles. Oh, and this is another project I saw that I really liked. So this is the website same.energy, and it is a visual search engine that uses the latent space of I don't know exactly what model they're using, but basically you look at an image and actually we can go to home. This is not going to work super well, but there's a number of images on the screen. I can see one that is looking up on a spiral staircase. So if I click on that, it's a gray and white image. I get a bunch of other images of architectural features, many of which are spiral staircases. We have one that's like terraces that looks sort of like visually similar. They're all black and white or sepia tone. So it's a way to find images that are similar to each other filter by using this latent space. I think this is a great computer vision application. I think it's something that would be very hard to do a different way. I think it's very useful for artists or people who are looking for a very particular type of image. And if you you're searching for things, you can also filter specifically by images that are licensed CC BY. So if you were trying to use this for a commercial application, I just turned it on. It's removed a lot of the images, but many of the images that replace them are still very visually relevant and useful. So great resource, great use of the technology. I think difficult to be used in a malicious way, very intuitive, user-friendly, clear use case, 10 out of 10, good computer vision project. Yeah, I feel like I do worry sometimes that it can get a little bit repetitive. And also, I just don't enjoy just like being upset about projects all the time. So I'm trying to find more examples of stuff that I'm like, yes, good use of the technology. I like this one. So yes, I would wholeheartedly recommend this. And again, it is same.energy. And I'll actually pop that in the chat as well if people want to check it out. It is free. Isn't that nice? Yeah, and I think there may be a way to like pay for it potentially, but yeah, let's see. Going back to the about, it's made by Jacob Jackson. They use search for deep learning. Yes, so the monetization model is selling API access to companies. If you're interested with them, please get in touch. The principal advantage of our search is that it works without any tags or metadata. All we need is the image. So yeah, give that a shot. Good project. Excited to see where they go. Best of luck for monetization. Great job. Great job, Jacob. 10 out of 10. Next up. Oh, this was really interesting. So there was a really long discussion recently. Actually, is it the next one? No, never mind. I'm just going to go back. We'll come back to this. But there was a long discussion recently about sort of like what social media companies will and won't do on. It came up in a long discussion on Twitter, and I happened to run across this really interesting report. So this is October 7th, 2021. So it is from last year, but I ran across it this year. And it is from the European Commission. It's written by Didier Reynders, maybe? The Commissioner for Justice, Directorate General for Justice and Consumers, and it is the 6th evaluation of the Code of Conduct Countering Illegal Hate Speech Online. And I think something that's just important to know is that I think a lot of people have a lot of faith in companies that is maybe not well justified. And in this case, they are looking at basically how well did companies do when they were like, hey, this is hate speech, you have to take it down, right? So the 6th evaluation shows that while the average of notifications reviewed within 24 hours remains high, 81%, it decreased in comparison to 2020, 90%. At 62%, the average removal rate was also lower than in 2019 and 2020. However, broken down by IT company, the progress of Instagram, so in 2020, they only removed 42% of the hate speech. In 2021, they removed 66% of the hate speech, and Twitter, which went from 35 to 49%, is noteworthy. TikTok was included in the evaluation for the first time and performed well, 80%. So yeah, none of these companies are above, 85% in terms of removing the reported hate speech, which is low. I would like, for most hate speech to be removed because it is damaging. So anyway, this is sort of a update about the stuff that they were doing and more information. And I'm assuming, this came out early October of last year, and there will probably be one in the future. Robbie says, I mean free to use for YouTube videos. So I would say if you are using the... so that question is, I'm assuming, referring to Same Energy. So if you are using the CC BY filter, So now I'm clicking on a picture of a little glass with a parrot embedded in it. If I click this one here, it will filter for things that are CC BY. So CC BY images are allowed to be reused, but you do have to credit the source. So I'm clicking that. There's a number of related images that are now sorry, my dog's barking. A number of related images that now you would be free to use, but you would have to credit the original source. Oh, this is a big one. So there was this thing that came up this week where a ggplot2 dependency broke on one of the machines that was used to check stuff before they go up on CRAN. So there was a lot of packages that were like, hey, this is going to be taken down soon. It got resolved. It's all fine. If you heard that all the ggplot2 packages are going to be taken down, not happening. Don't worry. It is okay. Yes. So if you heard a little bit about the CRAN drama, know that it has been resolved. It is fine. It was due to a build issue on one of the packages that had dependencies. But, you know, if you're building R packages, I think this is a helpful example of why reducing the number of dependencies makes your life a little bit easier in the long term. So, FYI, if you hadn't heard. Oh, and this is one that I hinted at talking about on Tuesday. So this is a tweet from Paul Azunre, again, apologies if I ever mispronounce anything, whose Twitter handle is @PAZUNRE. And Paul tweeted here, we cannot just be driven by, quote, number of speakers and, quote, financial projections when prioritizing machine learning research. If we do, we will just import the same fairness issues as we were already seeing happen on the continent. Fair representation of all people should be a fundamental tenet, which I think is a really good point. And, you know, if you're just looking at counts of individuals, minority languages will always be playing second fiddle. And if that's happening all the time, then the need for language technologies in those communities will just never be addressed. So I think it is very important to sometimes, you know, take off the capitalism glasses and be like, hey, I'm trying to decide what to work on, what would be the most impactful for my community, right? And I say my community there because I don't necessarily think that a good solution is for a bunch of researchers who do not work in an area, who aren't from an area, to, you know, suddenly decide they want to work on it because they think it's cool, trump in, not consider the respects of the community whose data they are harvesting. And yeah, so this is something that's happened quite a lot in the history of the field. Sometimes people refer to this as parachute research. So people like parachute in, do whatever they need to do to improve their career, and then leave when they're done without considering or, you know, centering the needs of the community that they're working in. So anyway, I think it's a great point and one to think about in your own work. And I know that many of you, certainly many of you who are part of the YouTube community, speak minority languages. So I imagine this hits quite home to, I imagine this hits quite close to home for a lot of you. Wow. Next up. So this is a Pew report from January of this year, Pew Research Center report, but I don't think we talked about it then. And I think it is relevant, particularly since we've been talking a lot about how generative models allow for a greater degree of online harassment. One sec, let me close the door and try to make the barking a little bit less loud. I will be back in just a sec. Hopefully that will help. So some things that I thought were particularly interesting about this report is that they found that about half of people had experienced harassment, and that while the total volume of harassment hasn't changed as much recently, the severity of it has increased significantly, right? Particularly looking at these types of severe harassment, physical threats, stalking, sustained harassment, and then sexual harassment. So online harassment, definitely a thing. Doesn't seem to be getting more common. Does seem to be getting more serious. And I think some other things that were particularly that really struck out to me, right, was looking at I'm looking for a specific figure here. This one. So the reason for which different people, or the focus of the harassment that different people received, depended on their, their identity. So a lot of it was identity based, right? So if we look at a column for sexual orientation, 50% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people reported having experienced harassment about their sexual orientation, whereas no more, only 12% of straight people had, right? Or if we look at experienced harassment about your ethnicity, and remember, this includes things like name calling, which I would say is not particularly severe type of harassment. 17% of white people responded that they had experienced it, compared to 54% of Black people and 47% of Hispanic people. Looking at gender, 18% of men had experienced harassment about their gender, compared to 47% of women, right? So people also looking at lesbian, gay, and bisexual, which I'm gonna assume includes the trans community here, because they don't have a separate breakdown in the gender column, which I would probably have rewritten this survey instrument to make it more ecologically valid, but not my survey. 54% of LGB folks, as identified by the survey, had experienced gender-based harassment, whereas only 31% of straight people had. So I think something, we talked about intersectionality recently. I think something that really comes up here is that who you are really changes the type of harassment that you get. So just things to keep in mind. And then the other thing that really stuck out on me here is I can't find it, but basically they were looking at how much people thought harassment was a big deal, and one of the biggest distinction was that self-identified women found that it was a much bigger deal in their lives and it affected them more than self-identified men. So there's a pretty big gap there as well. So yeah, interesting. Are we talking about R? All right. Next up, so unfortunately, this is another one of those ML projects which absolutely cannot do what they say they can do. So here we have a poster created by Sapshot DNA Analysis for the Edmonton Police Service that has a computer-generated image of a person, and they claim to have generated this image accurately from DNA data. And they also claim to be able to detect skin color from DNA data. This has been quote tweeted by Dr. Adam Rutherford, who is from Adam's bio, president of Humanists UK, lecturer in genetics at UCL, that's University College of London, genetics, race, eugenics, history of science, plus movies, books, and cricket, things that Adam would talk about. And as a geneticist, he says, geneticist here, you can't make facial profiles or accurate pigmentation predictions from DNA. This is dangerous snake oil. So this company cannot do what they are claiming, and their sort of rendered facial prediction is in no way accurate enough to be used to target people for, police harassment, basically. So yeah, they can't do this. They lied. They're taking public money, and this is, potentially very dangerous for people who happen to look like that. All right, so that is all the practical stuff. Next up, we're going to talk about politics, and there is a lot today. There has been a lot of sort of government, policy changes and stuff going into effect and stuff being proposed. So buckle in. There's just going to be a lot of it. All right. First up, Also, just going to warn you, it's going to be a little bit US focused, but not completely. So apologies for those of you who do not care about US politics. So first up, I don't know why this is gray, is a page from Context, which is published by Thomson Reuters, on the ongoing internet outage in Indian Kashmir. So the title is Living in the Stone Age, Offline for 18 Months in Indian Kashmir. And the authors are Mehran Bhatt and Raina, perhaps? Apologies if I'm saying that incorrectly, Chandran. Published September 29th, 2022. So it is a discussion of this ongoing internet outage. So reading here, what's the context? India's clocked up more internet shutdowns than any other country, including one of the world's longest, in Kashmir, forcing everyone from journalists to students to find creative workarounds. So perhaps obviously due to sampling bias, we often don't hear about internet outages, and I think that it is really important to keep an eye on as members of an international community. So this one is about Kashmir. It's 18 months, which is absolutely wild. Oh, sorry, I said it was ongoing. I don't think it is ongoing. It started in 2019. So for 18 months, it ended in February 5th, 2021. So my apologies, I was incorrect. Please do not believe me that when I said it was ongoing. Yes, but anyway, so it's just sort of a story about the effect of this on people living in Kashmir. And I will pop the link in the chat if you're interested in learning more. Yeah, and it talks about what is it like to live with an internet shutdown, which is something that is also currently affecting, I believe, Iran and Iranian people. There's been a government-mandated internet shutdown due to ongoing protests against theocratic rule. So, yeah, something that authoritarian governments really like, and I think important to know about and to advocate against. And also, I think just a very powerful piece about what it was like to live under an internet shutdown. Next up, so this is from ProPublica. I'm looking for the byline so I can give you that information. It's by Richard A. Webster, and this was actually published in 2021, November 22, 2021, but I happened to run across my desk this week, and I thought it was good to talk about. And it is talking about intentional data poisoning by police in the US. So the headline here is, if everybody's white, there can't be any racial bias, the disappearance of Hispanic drivers from traffic records. So basically, what's happening is that this investigation found that law enforcement agencies who had been, and I'm quoting here, accused of targeting Hispanic drivers in traffic stops, and has also been found to be identifying them as white on tickets based on this investigative journalism. So the reason I think this is particularly relevant for people who are working in machine learning is that, right, we often make the assumption that the data is the ground truth. This is a really clear example of it not being the ground truth for political means, and has, you know, a clear effect on the world, right? If you are trying to do metrics-driven policing, and that's how you're trying to, like, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Create civil oversight over these organizations, they'll just lie. So that's important to keep in mind. All right. And then this is about the meta text to video thing that I promised a little bit earlier. Chrono Zero says, woof, good old police. Yep. Just a handy reminder, particularly for those of you in the US. I'm not sure what it is like in other jurisdictions. The police are absolutely allowed to lie to you, and if you are in a situation where you are speaking to them, don't say anything except to explicitly ask for a lawyer. That's it. Yeah, they are not your friend. So this is a Twitter thread by Andy Biao, B-A-I-O, at Wax Pancake on Twitter. From bio, working on Skittish HQ, no idea what that is. I made a bunch of stuff, help make Kickstarter, he, him. So he had a long Twitter thread about discussion of the data that was used in Meta's text-to-video AI. So if you will remember from Tuesday, my number one gripe with the Whisper paper is that we know nothing about the data that was in it, except that it might include TED Talks. And in this case, Simon Wilson, who is the creator of Dataset Proj and co-creator of Django, PSF member, board member, excuse me, had looked at the videos that were used as the training data and made them searchable. And what Andy had found is that including in that training data was 10.7 million 15-second long watermark sample videos scraped from Shutterstock. The researchers, and here I'm reading, the researchers who made the dataset acknowledged the copyright implications, writing, "The use of data collected for the study is authorized via the Intellectual Property Office's exceptions to copyright for non-commercial research and private study." So in the original data collection, they were like, hey, it's fine because we're not doing this for commercial use. But then, and again, this is Andy, Meta is using that academic non-commercial data set to train a model for commercial use. Weird. I wonder how Shutterstock feels like this. Feels about this. Other information. In addition to Shutterstock clips, Meta also used 10 million video clips from this 100 million video data set from Microsoft Research Asia. Not to mention, I'm continuing to read here, on that GitHub page is where the videos in the dataset were sourced from, which can be found in the paper. Microsoft Research Asia extracted the clips from 3.3 million YouTube videos. So in addition to a massive chunk of Shutterstock's video collection, Meta also used YouTube videos collected by Microsoft to make its text-to-video AI. What a world. And as a result of that thread, he also went and wrote a blog post on waxy.org titled AI Data Laundering, How Academic and Nonprofit Researchers Shield Tech Companies from Accountability. And I would just say as a, aside that a lot of those researchers are directly funded by tech companies via grants. Or they don't even necessarily need to be monetary grants, but things like compute grants, which are extremely common. This is a sort of a long discussion of this, right? That these data that were originally collected, supposedly for non-commercial use are now directly being used for commercial use. And in Andy's words, outsourcing the heavy lifting of data collection and model training to non-commercial entities allows corporations to avoid accountability and potential legal liability. It's currently unclear if training deep learning models on copyright material is a form of infringement, but it's a harder case to make if the data was collected and trained in a non-commercial setting. One of the 4 factors of the fair use exception in the U.S. copyright law is the purpose or character of the use. In their fair use index, the U.S. Copyright Office writes, courts look at how the party claiming fair use is using the copyrighted work and are more likely to find that nonprofit educational and non-commercial uses are fair. And a little bit further down, meanwhile, a company like Stability AI would be free to commercialize that research in their own Dream Studio product or wherever else they used, taking credits for its success to raise a rumored $100 million funding round at a valuation of up to $1 billion, while shifting any questions around copyright or privacy onto the academic/nonprofit entities they funded. And this is a quote from Twitter here, from EMAD, Emostique. Not sure if I mentioned, but Stable Diffusion is a model created and released by CompViz at the University of Heidelberg. The LION dataset is created by the German charity of the same name. We support both. This is announced in the outlined in the announcement post, has implications for the stuff above, right? So the basic idea here is that, hey, you need a lot of data that is not licensed, that you don't want to license for commercial use. Well, pay some researchers at an academic institute. They'll collect that data and train the model, again, in this educational nonprofit setting, and then you can use that model for commercial use is sort of the grift here. Yeah, so a big thing that's happening, and I will pop this in the chat as well if you would like to read the whole thing. But I think it's important, especially if you are working in vision, to consider what data you're using, where it came from, and the possible future legal implications, right? Particularly since we are starting to see people make copyright claims on generated images. Right? What does that mean for the images that were used to generate them? Question mark. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But this certainly feels bad to me, and I'm not happy that they're doing it. And of course, there's really big privacy implications for this as well, right? When people's data are used without their knowledge or consent, right? So if your data, actually, is it the next thing that we're going to talk about? Yes. So if your data is in the LION dataset and you want it taken down and you had no idea that it was even scraped in the first place, how would you find out about that? What would you do about it? So this is a discussion sort of in the community. This is by William Agnew, who is reading from the bio here, AI robots at UW-CS, so University of Washington Computer Science and Engineering, Queer and AI organizer, Out in STEM VP, external partnerships, resistance AI organizers, he, him. And he did a thread asking, does anyone want to form a data collective against the LION dataset? Semi-automated system that sent the LION maintainers and everyone who's used the dataset GDPR takedown requests for people who sign up to render this garbage dataset unusable. So what he's proposing here is an automated system where people who want their data removed can have an easier way to submit a GDPR complaint. And then some people being like, yeah, I'm into that. And then also some of the people who are working on the data set responded. So one of those people is Arena Rish, for which she says, okay, let me clarify this. There are no images in LION. LION can only take down links that were collected in Common Crawl. These links will still remain in Common Crawl as it is not LION collecting these. The images will still remain on the public internet. And my response to arguments like this is that by collecting and coordinating the links and making it easy to bulk download data, you are reducing the obscurity of the things that you link to. So even if you are not personally collecting that data, right? Let's say that I had a YouTube video and I made it unlisted, but the URL would remain stable. It's no longer discoverable by, say, search engines, but if you put it into your dataset collection so that people can go and find it, that is not my intention. After having made the dataset unlisted, my intention is to make it more obfuscated. And inclusion in a data set like this, even if it's just a collection of links, makes it less obfuscated, right? So it reduces the privacy of people whose information was included, and they might not even realize that that was happening. And also, given what we know about the severity and consistency of data leakage, private data leakage, even from as little as one example, certainly in text data sets, I'm not as familiar with image data sets. I will say that off the top of my head. I'll be very upfront about that, rather. You have a situation where someone's private data may be leaked due to their images being included in an image data set that they didn't know about, even if, say, they had removed external links to that image data set, right? Or like if you've ever used an app that lets you share photos by creating a public link, people's intentions is never for that to be used intentionally to have that data that was shared, scraped, and put into a data set. And they wouldn't necessarily know that it had happened. So even though they are not, you know, storing the images themselves, my response to things like, hey, we're just collecting the links, is you are reducing obscurity, you are reducing privacy, and in a way that is very difficult for individuals to both learn about and mitigate. Upsetting. Upsetting. Yep. And a big discussion here. Some people are against it, some people are for it. Basically, the people who are against it are like, well, it's too late, so you might as well keep doing it. It's already been done. And the people who are against it are like, hey, people don't like when you use their images this way. You shouldn't do that. All of which is extremely relevant to something that happened this week. So something I've talked about previously is that engineering, most engineering disciplines are professions, and I mean that in the legal state of the word, which means that you have a duty of care towards the people who you interact with in a professional context. If you are a civil engineer, and you build a bridge and the bridge collapses, you are personally, individually liable for, the harm that you have done. Previously, this has not been the case with software engineers, due in no small part to lobbying from tech companies. However, the EU has just created a new proposal, so this is not law yet. It's going to start trickling through the EU legislative process, which I am deeply unfamiliar with, so big old caveat there. I know it takes a while and there's probably going to be some changes, but this bill would open up both companies and, it seems like, my impression is, not a lawyer, individual developers to individual liability for harms caused by AI systems. So this is going to change the face of what software engineering looks like as a discipline. For situations like this, okay, you train something based on the Lion data set, it violates somebody's, it violates somebody's privacy, or, someone uses that data set to, generate fake porn of somebody for a harassment campaign. Okay, well, you allowed them to do that. The person who was harassed may, seek, court stuff, may have a lawsuit against the person who harassed them, but they may also have a lawsuit against you for enabling that harassment. So watch this space. Obviously, some more stuff is going to happen before it goes into effect, but it's going to really, really, if it passes, change what it looks like. And very predictably, tech companies are like, we don't want this. Don't legislate us. No, we would actually prefer to continue to do exactly whatever we want. And a lot of privacy rights advocates are saying, like, it doesn't go far enough, but it's a good start. So I don't think it's going to make anybody like deliriously happy, but I think it definitely is going to have more protections than we currently do. So this one's actually from a little bit ago. This is from September 15th. This is an article from the New York Times that I'm looking at now, and that is Governor Newsom from California has just signed into law the Children's Online Safety Bill. And the point of this, it's sort of similar to, what is it? COPPA, I think, the one that means that if you're making YouTube videos, you have to say whether or not it's for children. And if it is for children, you're limited in what sort of content you can do, which I think is great. I think that is a good and important thing. But this is a more rigorous bill to protect children's safety online. And so, for example, one of the things that I think was violating it in the EU, but also probably would violate this new one, is that children were allowed to make their Instagram accounts business accounts and then put their phone numbers as public-facing information. So I believe that Meta got fined for that in the EU, and I believe that this legislation would prohibit similar things. So it's signed into law in California. The thing about serving things to the US is that it is very difficult to serve things to one state and not another. And in generally, when California enacts tech policy, it affects all of the US. And also, in general, California has the strictest consumer and, technological regulations, I guess. I don't know what the word I'm trying to say there is, but yeah. Ella, hey, good to see you. Thanks for keeping you in the loop. Yeah, of course. I hope you're doing well. Anyway, so if you're working in the US or people are using your software in the US, you're probably going to start having to be compliant with this. And it's probably going to be a whole big thing. And if you get a bunch of updates from various websites you use in a little bit that's like, hey, we've updated our terms of service, it's probably going to be this one. Speaking of liability, I warned you, this is a juicy week. So the US Supreme Court is hearing two cases right now. And if you're not familiar with the US justice system, the Supreme Court is now very conservative. Even compared to the United States as a whole, it is much, much more conservative due to recent change in the makeup of the court. So interesting. Alexi says, prosecute computer producers if a criminal used a computer. So I think there's a difference between a tool that has a lot of uses and a tool that has a few specific uses. And a great example here would be the difference between a chef's knife and a gun, right? Chef's knives are generally useful. They have a lot of uses, and yes, they can be used for violence, but their primary use is not for violence. Whereas something like a gun, sure, I guess you could use it as a table leg. You could use it to like poke a fire, right? But those are clearly not the intended primary use, which is for violence. And that violence may be, you know, a general benefit, like for hunting. I live in a place where the white deer population is not managed enough, and let me tell you, hunting would be great for our local ecology here in the eastern woodlands. But the primary use of that tool is for violence, right? So for things like you know, when things where there's a sort of limited commercial use that's non-violent, but a lot of uses that are violent, I think that's something you have to consider when you're building things, right? Like your puppy kicking machine TM might also be useful to like open doors, perhaps, but if it's designed to kick puppies and that's the primary use, then that's, you know, maybe not something you should build. Anyway, so the US Supreme Court is hearing two cases about terrorist consent, and the sort of big thing here is that they're really going to be looking at Section 230. So this page I'm looking at now is by Bloomberg. The story is Social Media Company Liability Draws Supreme Court Scrutiny, October 3rd, 2022, by Greg Stohr, S-T-O-H-R. And the general idea is that there's a bunch of cases where social media companies and, you know, internet service providers are being taken to court for their role in providing and sharing terrorist content. And previously they've been protected from liability here by Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act, which basically means that I can't, you know, sue. There are some protections for companies that are providing hosting and stuff from being directly sued for the content that they provide, right? Those are currently being heard. If they pass, this is a court case. If Section 230 is sort of like ruled by the court to no longer be active, or its scope is reduced, it is not a overstatement to say that the face of the internet is going to change drastically into the future, and I can't tell you what it's going to look like, but I can tell you that a lot of marginalized people are going to be hurt. So sort of the particularly for activists working in the, you know, civil liberty space and free speech space on the internet, this is going to hurt poor marginalized folks a lot more than it is going to hurt large tech companies, but we'll see. Alexi says, are there any open source licenses which can prohibit EU users from using my code? I have no idea. Absolutely none. Yep, no idea. Not the person to talk about that. I would talk to a lawyer. Yep. And then this is a think piece from the MIT Tech Review on why Section 230 is worth saving. And this one is from September 9, 2020. But, you know, this particular section of US legislation has been in discussion a lot recently. And I think a lot of these same points still stand. So, yeah. So we'll see. No idea what this is going to look like. Just know that it is happening, and if it is revoked, then I can't tell you what the future of technology looks like. For those of you who think that technological progress is linear and predictable. That was a little bit mean, sorry. But this is a great example of a time when decisions by civil society are going to drastically, both of those, drastically, change what the future looks like for technology. And And also, in case you're like, well, at least, you know, the Supreme Court justices are well versed in technology and its uses. So this is a tweet by Eli Meistel, ELIE at NYC, sorry, ELIE NYC is the Twitter at, who is a justice correspondent for The Nation. Reports that Justice Alito said, this is a computer. It doesn't have any intent, right? For talking about how, you know, computer decisions are made. So I believe that this one is actually not in reference to the Section 230 cases, but in reference to the affirmative action cases that are going up against the Supreme Court that, basically, affirmative action in the United States is when, during college admissions, the historical racial landscape, particularly racial landscape of the United States, is considered to, you know, increase equity in our society as a whole. Some people really don't like them. And particularly, some white folks think that they deserve all the spots at colleges, and if they don't get one, it's because it's been taken by someone else who deserved it less. Which not generally the case, but that's some people's belief. And it seems likely, given the court makeup, that affirmative action is not going to be doable in the future. But yep. Anyway, talking about you know, prediction and you know, racial bias in systems, and of course, like we were just talking about, right, this is a computer, it doesn't have any intent. We just talked about this paper that found that even when people know that the robot is there and know that it might be sexist, they tend to ignore it when it's being blatantly sexist and blame themselves and use, you know, stereotyping and prejudice instead. So very dangerous for someone in a position of power to have that belief. But there we are. Next up. Robbie says there's no linearity in the world. If you plot real world observations in a Cartesian plane, all are on a curve. That hasn't been my experience. I think curves are even a little bit more organized than life tends to be. I don't know, stuff's messy, and that's okay. All right, next up, this is a big one. I told you, big week for AI legislation and what the future is going to look like. And this is, so we were just talking about sort of, certainly the Supreme Court, I would say, does not have the context, it appears, to make, you know, informed decisions, but what do I know? A lot about machine learning in particular. So the US White House, which is in the legislative branch, just released from the Office of Science and Technology a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, subtitled Making Automated Systems Work for the American People. And I will pop this in the chat as well. The URL is www.whitehouse.gov/OSTP/AI-BILL-OF-RIGHTS/ And I didn't say the direction, because you know which one it is. It's the one that shows up in URLs. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it is a big thing. Actually, we may actually want to talk about this in one of my Tuesday streams, because I think it's going to be super relevant. And also, if any of you watching happen to be some of my students in the UW graduate NLP ethics, guess what? We're going to be talking about this in class. It's certainly happening. Oh, algorithmic discrimination protections. But I thought the computers couldn't have intent and be discriminatory. That was just me being fussy about Alito. Anyway, a person with whom I disagree on many things. So it's just a Bill of Rights, and something that sort of like the general gist of it is that, hey, you know, people should be, you know, protected from harm from automated systems, and the sort of outline of ideas here is that a lot of that protection is going to come from domain-specific federal executive organizations, right? So like the Department of Education for educational stuff, the Department of Health and Human Services for housing stuff, etc. So that's sort of the general gist here. I imagine we're going to hear a lot more about this in the future. Just know that it has happened. And yeah, maybe make some time to read it if you care about US tech policy. Next up, it's not all US stuff. This, I think, is a very heartening finding. So this is, I'm looking at a page from the Future of Privacy Forum, posted on September 30th, 2022, by Maria, Badillo, B-A-D-I-L-L-O. Apologies if I'm saying that incorrectly. And the headline is, Judge declares Buenos Aires fugitive facial recognition system unconstitutional. Yay! If you've been on the channel for a while, you know we are not a fan of facial recognition here. We are happy to see it not being used. So in addition to it being judged unconstitutional, which means it won't be used in Argentina anymore, woohoo! Congratulations, the people of Argentina. There was also sort of the thing that this judge based this on was the idea that collective privacy is a right in Argentinian law, which I think is really interesting and a really great template for thinking about these types of problems. Reading here, privacy is a collective right redressable through constitutional mechanisms. I'd love to live in a country where privacy was seen as a right at all, but B, a collective right that we all have, the right to have, but also a responsibility to maintain. So if we're thinking about things like the LION data set, deobfuscating and collecting and organizing data to make it easier to discover images, particularly images and videos, which include private individuals, would be, violating that collective right of privacy by reducing privacy through obscurity. So, yeah. Congratulations to the country of Argentina on this great win for privacy. Another one that's dark. I'm guessing that there's pop-ups that are just being blocked and it's just darkening the page, but so this is a piece, white paper, I guess, by Amnesty International, which is a human rights organization. And press release, I'm looking for a date here, sorry, so I can tell the date to y'all, but I don't see it. And the headline says, Myanmar, Facebook systems promoted violence against Rohingya, Meta owes reparations, right? So Amnesty International is not a governmental organization. They're a human rights organization, an NGO, non-governmental organization, nonprofit. And their claim is that because Meta enabled genocide, they owe reparations to the people who that violence was done against. I think this came out in September, but I don't know when. And then there's just a large discussion about this in more detail. Facebook, and reading here, Facebook owner Meta's dangerous algorithms and reckless pursuit of profit substantially contributed to the atrocities perpetrated by the Myanmar military against Rohingya people in 2017, Amnesty International said in a new report published today. This is certainly not Meta's position, but personally I agree, right? So again, thinking about the sort of dual use argument that we were talking about earlier, without Facebook, the scope of this harm would definitely have been a lot less. Genocide is a clear harm. It's a crime against humanity. It's a violation of fundamental human rights. It's the worst thing a group of human beings can do to another group of human beings, and a tech company not only enabled this, but also directly profited about it. So I would strongly agree with Amnesty International's stance on this, which I have not made friends by telling to people in Facebook leadership, but you know what? That's okay. If genocide is bad and you should not have helped people do it is what's going to make people not hang out with me, I did not want to hang out with them to begin with. Moving on. Oh, speaking of the EU, the Digital Services Act has now got final approval. So the Digital Services Act, we've talked about quite a bit. I'll pop this in the chat as well. And the page that I'm looking at now is the European Council of the European Union page. And it's a press release dated 4 October 2022. So the Digital Services Act, and this is a quote from Joseph Sakella, apologies if I'm saying that incorrectly, Minister for Industry and Trade. The Digital Services Act is one of the EU's most groundbreaking horizontal regulations, and I'm convinced, blah, 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 that's not actually useful or interesting. But there are a lot of new consumer protections that come with this act. So to read just a couple of the things that they've pulled out here, it lays down special obligations for online marketplaces in order to combat the online sale of illegal products and services, increases measures to control illegal content online. To be clear, in Europe, there are far fewer rights around free speech, which is why you hear about people being sued for libel in the UK way more than in the US. And it is also, for example, in Germany, straight up illegal to talk about Nazi stuff online, whereas in the US it is legal, right? Legal but awful, I believe, is the term that lawyers tend to use. And also just socially unacceptable. And obligations to platforms to react quickly while respecting fundamental rights. But it protects minors online by prohibiting platforms for using targeting advertising based on minors' personal data as defined by EU law. I love this. This makes me so happy. We should not be targeting kids with ads. Are you kidding me? Impose certain limits on the presentation and presentation of advertising and on the use of sensitive personal data for targeted advertising, including gender, race, and religion. Again, you'll love to see it. Fantastic. Bans misleading interfaces known as dark patterns, and practices aimed at misleading. So huge swath of consumer protections, going to make it much nicer to be an internet user in the EU or other places where they choose to follow the DSA. So really good act. I have been a fan of it for a while. Very excited to see it, get final approval. And there's also a big discussion about how this is going to interact with the ongoing Russian aggression in Ukraine, is how they describe it. So. Robbie says, by privacy, do you mean how much information people are willing to not share? For example, a person wants to use the internet but doesn't share anything about them, like name, age, etc. So I'm assuming, I don't know if that is in context to this law or just sort of in general. So privacy has been defined in a lot of ways, but I would say I think the thing that's most useful, at least for me as a framework, is to think about, can people have control over who sees this information and in what context, right? So I know that when I put a tweet on Twitter, it's going to be visible to everyone on Twitter, right? Whereas if I have a private Twitter and I put a tweet on Twitter, I expect that to be visible only to the people who are following me, and that I can remove people from that group at any time, right? However, if, that information is being used for targeted advertising, even the private Twitter information, that might not just be shared with the people who I intended to be the audience of it. So that's my sort of general personal framework, is that privacy means that I have control over who gets to get knowledge about me, in what context that happens, and I can withdraw consent for it. All right, and a final one. So this one is actually, this is a Medium article by Fair Trials from September 28th. The title is, "My Sons Were Profiled by a Racist Predictive Policing System. The AI Act Must Prohibit These Systems." And it's by Diana, oh, this is Dutch, Sardjoe, Sardio maybe? And it is a story from a mother who found out that, quote, "My sons were placed on lists called the Top 600 and Top 400 by the local Amsterdam Council. The council said the purpose of these lists, created by predictive and profiling systems, is to identify and give young people who have contact with the police extra attention from the council and organizations such as police, local public health service, and youth protection to prevent them from coming into contact with police again. This could not have been further from the truth. These predictive systems assess and profile young people in Amsterdam to determine who is likely to commit crimes." And I would say that is, citation needed. I don't think those systems can actually do it. In the future, the top 600 profiles, children over the age of 16, the top 400 profiles, children under the age of 16, right? So this is like kids that are being fed into this predictive policing system. And as a result of my sons being profiled by these systems, they were continually monitored and harassed by police. One was repeatedly accused of criminal activity along with other young boys he hung out with. Another time, I had to deal with police coming into my home. My son was arrested and I had to go pick him up from detention center late at night. Other mothers I know were threatened with having their children taken away from them, right? So this predictive policing is being used to harass children in a way that they have no recourse towards, and is, I'm not that familiar with what civil liberties are guaranteed to people in this jurisdiction, but I certainly, at a deep, visceral level, find this to be incompatible with civil liberties and just like living in a society. Really, really, really upsetting. So very upsetting piece about this use of racial profiling in Amsterdam. Hate it so much, and I would love for the AI Act. So the AI Act is the one that we were talking about that would produce, might make individual developers liable for the harms that they do. I would love it for this to be illegal in the US, in the UK, everywhere. I'd love to not be able to do this to kids, especially, but also anyone, right? Like in the US, you're innocent until proven guilty. Predictive policing is the absolute opposite of that. And again, just for me as a citizen, this seems like not of this place, but I know people are doing this in the US as well, a clear violation of civil liberties. So -10 out of 10 for this system. And also keep in mind that almost certainly there is somebody profiting from having built these systems, right? Somebody's getting paid here, and children are getting harassed because of it. Alexi says, you can read the terms and agreements. Not happy, don't use. Right, so if you don't like, I make educational videos. YouTube is by far the biggest platform for educational videos. If I want to make educational videos, I don't really have a choice if I need to get users, if I want to get viewers to not use YouTube, right? I stream to multiple platforms. Right, like I stream simultaneously to Twitch and YouTube, right? Like I'm doing this as a podcast as well. But especially when so much of our lives are digital and so much are online, right? Like if I don't like Zoom's terms of use, if I don't like their privacy policy, which used to be extremely bad, and I'm taking a university class and all of my classes are on Zoom, I don't really have a choice, right? It's a coercive relationship. That puts all of the power in the hands of the companies who are writing the EULAs, right? And also they are generally not written in a way that is conducive to actual informed consent, right? And I think that's very intentional by the companies. So they're very vague about what they might do with their data, or it's all in very technical language, or it's a 400-page single-space PDF. And they know that people aren't going to read them, and they know that people are going to agree because they have to. So yeah, I don't think that putting all of the onus for being harmed by systems on individual consumers is good for consumers, is good for society. And in the long term, it's not good for the companies, right? Because if people consistently hate what your company's doing, there's going to be legislation against it, at least again in democracies, because you are doing bad things and people don't tend to like that. So anyway, I think that's a very common stance, and I think that it is not great and also kind of poor engineering. On that note, let's talk about ethics. All right, let's hop right in. So this first paper is actually a paper. I put it under ethics instead of research, just because I think that's where it goes a little bit better. And it is from FACT 22. So FACT is Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency. It's a workshop put on by ACM. And the paper is by David Gray Witter and co-authors. And the title is Limits and Possibilities of, quote, Ethical AI and Open Source, a Study of Deepfakes. So I'm just going to quickly read this abstract and then we can talk about it. Obviously, they go into a lot more detail in the paper, and actually I'll pop this in the chat as well if people want to read it, which I would recommend. It's a good paper. Open source software communities are a significant site of AI development, but ethical AI discourses largely focuses on problems that arise in software produced by private companies. Design policy and tooling interventions to encourage ethical AI based on studies in private companies risk being ill-suited for an open source context, which operates under radically different organizational structures, cultural norms, and incentives. And I would also say that a lot of work that's been done, based on studies on private companies, companies are unlikely to give you access to their data and information if they don't think that if they think that you're going to tell them things that they don't want to hear. So I would say that there's also a limitation of conflict of interest in that state. Unless, of course, somebody's doing it without the explicit permission of the company, which I've done in the past. You just got to be real careful about making sure you read and follow those terms of services. In this paper, we show that significant and understudied harms and possibilities originate from differing practices of transparency and accountability in the open source community. And I should say this came out in June 2022, so before the Stable Diffusion paper, but obviously it applies. We conducted an interview study of an AI-enabled open source deepfake project to understand how members of that community reason about their ethics of their work. We found that notions of the freedom zero to use code without any restriction, alongside beliefs about technology neutrality and technological inevitability, we've talked about that, were essential to how community members frame their responsibilities and the actions they believed were and were not available to them, right? So if you're like, hey, technology is absolutely, it's going to happen this way, someone's going to do it, and yeah, it's unethical, and yeah, people will get hurt, but if I don't do it, someone else will. I think that a lot of people use that argument to absolve themselves of feelings of guilt and shame that they have. We propose a continuum between harms resulting from how a system is implemented versus how it is used, and show how commitments to radical transparency and open source allow great ethical scrutiny for harms wrought by implementation bugs, but allow harms through misuse to proliferate, requiring a deeper toolbox for disincentivizing harmful use. And I think this is a excellent point. So someone mentioned on Twitter, and I don't have a source for this, I'm so sorry, but these are not my words, when Stable Diffusion launched, that it is possible to both laud someone's transparency and also be aghast at what you find because of that transparency, right? So it can be good that you are sharing that information, but if the information itself is abhorrent, then both of those things can exist together, right? And I think that's a really good point, right? That if I can see the system and see what it's doing, I can be like, oh, you can do auditing, you can do, mitigation, but at the same time, if it's all open, if it's all publicly accessible, and in a system that has secondary or primary uses for harm. So for deepfakes, a huge, perhaps the primary use of deepfakes is for creation of porn from images of actual women without their consent, right? Which is certainly against my personal ethics to create content about people without their consent, particularly content that could be harmful to them. So their point here is that, yes, openness is good and that it allows you to see what the issues are with the implementation itself, but it can create more harm by allowing wide use of this technology, which I think with the Stable Diffusion, great example of that, obviously came out after this paper was written. We discussed how an assumption over control of downstream uses is often implicit in the discourses of ethical AI, but outline alternative possibilities for action in cases such as open source where this assumption may not hold, right? Which I think is a great point. And I think there's also, I think there's a little bit of washing my hands of personal culpability in particularly the computer vision community that I have noticed, where people will be like, well, yeah, you could use this, to harass people, but if people do it, it's not my fault. I just gave them all the tools and told them how to do it. So particularly thinking about the discussions that were happening on the Discord around Stable Diffusion before it's released, where the maintainers were like, hey, if you're going to do this to do illegal stuff, which we know very well you might do because it allows it, just don't do it on our servers so that we are not personally liable for it. right? Which is a little bit like being like, hey, you know, I've made a new rat poison. I'm going to use it to poison rats. But if you're using it to poison people, just don't use my teacups. Which, I mean, again, if you've watched my channel for a while, you probably know that goes pretty far against my personal ethos as an engineer and technologist. But, yeah. Andre says, you may use Jitsi instead of Zoom. I mean, not if I am required to use Zoom for class, right? Robbie says, this violates companies' privacy. Companies do not have a right to privacy, right? Companies are not moral agents and they do not have moral rights. And you cannot change my opinion on that. I will tell you that right now. Alexi says, in the Zoom case, it's the fault of the government to enforce them. The terms and DNA. Whatever the A stand for. Associations, I don't remember. Anyway, they're professionals who can read and analyze them for you, and if you want to know. But again, you're shifting responsibility onto the individuals, right? Like, let's say I need to use plagiarism software to turn in an assignment for school, and it has a terms and conditions. I'm not going to call up my lawyer and be like, hey, should I be doing this? Does this open me up for potential issues? Alexi says, P.S. using YouTube, you exchange your data for publicity. There are better platforms privacy-wise, but YouTube can make you feel same as you sell your soul. That's the deal. I mean, if I want my content to be broadly accessible and discovered, buddy, it's got to be YouTube, right? And I think that, you know, what I have to say is very important and valuable, or otherwise I wouldn't be spending my time on it. And like, I just like as an individual producer and consumer don't have a lot of choice there, right? And I'm, you know, I've been very upfront about this. I'm trying to make this my job. And I mean, also to be upfront about it, I am not at the point where I can monetize my YouTube channel yet, and probably won't be for a good couple of years. So I'm not making money directly off of YouTube. I'm making money from my wonderful coffee sponsors. Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all. And like, as an individual consumer, I have limited power and I can lobby my government, but I certainly don't have as much time and money and power as, you know, Alphabet, the company, to do that lobbying. So yeah, especially the older I get, the more my patience for people who are like, well, I had to do the bad thing. I didn't have any choice. Or if people didn't want bad things to happen to them, they just shouldn't let it happen. The less patience I have for that particular weaseliness about, again, personal liability, which I realize as, you know, technologists and software engineers, certainly in the US, we don't have. But I think we should, and I think as people living in society, and, you know, individual moral agents capable of thinking for ourselves, looking around and being like, hey, what I am doing voluntarily, I have other choices about what I can do, is directly hurting people, and you continue to choose to continue to do it and choose to continue to directly hurt people. You can give yourself all of the excuses that you like, but at the end of the day, you're the one who's gonna have to, like, you know, lay awake in bed and think about it, right? You're the one who's going to have to, you know, as you get older, look back on your life and be like, how did I use my time? What did I prioritize? Was the world better or worse for me being in it? And that, you know, foundationally and fundamentally rests on you. And if you don't choose to prioritize your values, or if your values are things like, let's say money, and that's what you're prioritizing in your life, that's a choice that you're making. And I think that, you know, again, it's a choice that you're making. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I am going to tell you that you need to own up to that, to being the person who made that choice and to the effects, good and bad, that choice had. So anyway, it's just my thoughts. Clearly for me, my main value is not money. Let me tell you that. It's not even in like the top 50, but yeah. Robbie says, if someone embedded me in a photo software that made me famous, how would I react? If they were doing it without my explicit consent, I'd be furious. I would be really upset. Yeah, clear violation of privacy. Hate it. Anyway, next up. So we've been talking a lot about art, generative art, particularly generative visual art, especially with the Stable Diffusion launch, and also DALL-E. And this is a response from an artist. So this is a Twitter thread by Flying Trilobite on Twitter, Glendon Mello, illustrator, writer, community builder, marketing manager, cyclist, BFA. BFA, if you're unfamiliar, is a Bachelor of Fine Arts. And it is, I believe, a terminal degree in doing of art. So this is an artist who has spent a lot of time doing and presumably thinking about art. And this is a quote tweet in response to a Washington Post article from September 29th, headline, AI can create any image based on a prompt in seconds, and researchers are worried. Yes, we've talked about this on the channel. I don't need to go into a bunch of detail about my thoughts on it. And Glendon says, for many artists, we're not scared of new tools and tech, which I would definitely agree. Like, digital art as a medium is, you know, been widely embraced by the artistic community. Someone comes out with a new type of pigment, artists are all over it. Like, novelty is not something that art as a field tends to shy away from. The dilemma here is that billions of our images have been added to databases to train these word prompt AI image platforms without our knowledge or consent. So again, coming to this idea of consent, control over, you know, what you create, what you produce, your own image. Would I enjoy loading up my portfolio in an exclusive data set to create some images based off my own work? Sounds fun. But what DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, etc. have done, wherever the legality lands, is rob artists of agency and hand it to commercial interests. And specifically, hand it to commercial interests for profit, right? This is taking the commercial benefit of this production of art from the artists to tech companies without the artists ever being compensated or considered. And so now the AI roller coaster is loaded up with writers. Artists are left begging for someone to take us seriously and put guardrails on the thing. Artists should have been in the room at its creation. The ethicists should have been in the room. Yes, definitely agree. And just to continue reading, it's a little bit of a long thread, but the general gist is that you know, it is not that artists are against technology. It is not that they don't like the idea of generative art. It is that they are being directly taken advantage of in an extractive way that does not benefit them, that they had no consent in. Which, yeah, that sucks. I hate it, right? So just like we were talking about, if my image was used in generative art, and it, you know, got really popular, I'd hate that. I wouldn't like that. It would be, you know, a violation of my privacy, you know? Alexi says the responsibility point of view is we should not have it. We have it. You cannot escape from it. Oh, like individual responsibility? I mean, legally, again, legally in the US, if I build, you know, AI Puppy Kicker 2000 and it kicks a bunch of puppies, I am not legally liable for that, right? Even though I think I probably should have been. But yeah, the responsibility's there. Yeah, so this has been sort of my point from the beginning, talking about, you know, generative art, is that you should talk to artists and think about artists. And just like when I talk about that extractive relationship of, you know, someone coming in and doing, you know, technological neocolonialism to a language community without their consent, without benefiting that community, it's the exact same extractive relationship that's happening here with artists. You know, visual artists, that extremely wealthy, well-resourced, and powerful collection of people. I'm being facetious there. They are none of those things. And, you know, I have a lot of friends who are artists and who are visual artists and who are suffering a lot and aren't going to suffer less because of technology, which, like, at that point, what's the point of the goddamn technology if it's not reducing suffering? Anyway, moving on. So now we're gonna have a little bit of a chatbot section. So this is, I think this is actually like a newsletter thing, but this is a little description of DeepMind's chatbot called Sparrow, which I guess we could have talked about in the research thing. But basically, they do the same thing that the paper that we talked about, which one? Nope. 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 One sec. I'm gonna find it. They do basically the same thing that we talked about earlier. I genuinely cannot find it. Oh, this one. This self-act system, where it includes Google queries as part of it. Of course, this was from Meta and Alan. And then this other project is from DeepMind. Where is it? There it is. Right, so basically adding a little bit more grounding and then doing some human the thing where you look at something and give it a judgment. Human evaluation. Human evaluations as well. So anyway, and a nice little aside here from Sarah Hooker, who is at Cohere, who we've talked about a couple times. She told me that one of the biggest hurdles in safely deploying conversational AI system is their brittleness, meaning they perform brilliantly until they are taken to unfamiliar territory, which makes them behave unpredictably. It's also a difficult problem to solve, this is from Sarah, because any two people might disagree on whether a conversation is inappropriate. And even if we agree that something is appropriate right now, this may change over time or relied on a shared context that can be subjective. Anyway, they're talking about doing like more human in the loop and different measures, but foundationally, the issue here is that the chatbot usage has risks. It has unique risks, and mitigation is difficult and an unsolved problem. Yeah. Hello, good humanity. Welcome to the chat. Lexi says, I don't agree with the what I alone can do thing. The first world countries have the best framework for that. That's the whole point. I cannot name any representative with machine learning, data science, AI background. Yeah, I mean, let me be clear. I am very, yes, I definitely agree. I take my, responsibilities as a member of a democratic country extremely seriously. I am, personally as involved as I can be, but it is difficult for sure to for individuals, even all individuals together, to compete with companies and their resources and names. I'm just saying, like, it is hard, not that it is not possible, and not that it is not worth doing and working on. Maybe it's time to have a representative with machine learning background. Oh. Perhaps if they also have a lot of other knowledge that is relevant to being a good representative in a democratic situation. But I know a lot of people in machine learning who have little to no grasp of like basic civics in the US, so I'm a little bit on that. Although I will say, so the AI, we talked about the White House's new AI guidelines. Those were crafted with input from people who do have a very deep background in machine learning. So there are definitely people, not representatives as much, but certainly, especially in the executive branch, specialists working in machine learning who are providing feedback and information to, the governmental processes. So, all right. Also thinking on that same sort of like, chatbot safety. So this is a New York Times article by Ellen Berry from September 30th. Can smartphones help predict suicide is the headline here. And I will say, if you are experiencing a mental health crisis, I would, one sec, let me find my go-to link for that. I should have had that. Sorry, I'm pulling up the global lines. Here we go. So if you are, currently or know someone who is experiencing a mental health crisis, I'm getting the link. One resource that you can use to find more information is checkpoint.org/com/global, which includes a lot of resources around the world, because I know not everyone here is in the US, as well as resources in the US. So. Alexi says, tab in 2024 for representative. It is something that I have only ever passingly considered. I don't know that I have the depth and breadth of knowledge to be a good legislator. let me put it that way. And I think acknowledging your own limitations is an important part of being a member of a democratic society. So, sorry, now that I've given you some resources in case this is a topic that is particularly effective for you, there is an ongoing research project that is using wearables and smartphones to potentially pinpoint attempts or possibly even ideation. And I would say it is an interesting project. From my reading about it, it's, completely, everyone knows that they're in it, right? So I think doing this without consent would absolutely be deeply unethical, but it's being done with consent, it's being done with informed consent. And from the sort of discussions included in this story with participants, it seems to be, particularly the sort of like journaling and check-in and automated aspects, seems to be helpful for some of the participants. So obviously a very sensitive topic, obviously very dangerous to get wrong, but particularly if it's in a very limited way, and particularly if it's with individuals who know that this is something that is happening to them and are choosing to consent and have, continuous opt-in, I think it has the potential to be a good use of the technology. So I was very worried about it when I first read this headline, but sort of reading through and learning more about the research, I think it's probably okay. I'm interested to hear more. And like I said, consent. People should know that they are doing this and choose to do it. And that seems to be a big part of what is helpful, as well as they know that it's happening, and they also know that, it is not a human doing this. So. Yeah, next up. So I warned you this, we were going to be on a little bot. Get this out of the way. Skip it. I warned you we were going to be on a little bit of a bot kick. So this is, I know some of you have thought about similar projects. Sorry, one sec. This is a news story by Wired. Sorry, I forgot to do my voice interpretation, by Grace Brown. It was published October 1st, 2022. The title is The Problem with Mental Health Bots. And just to do a quick summary, basically they're summarizing a lot of the ongoing projects and products that people are paying for. And sort of one of the big problems is that there's no good empirical evidence that they actually do anything. And what studies there are that do show a positive effect, they tend to be small studies, and also run by the companies whose product it is. So yeah, kind of a not exactly conflict of interest free, right? So I think one paper that was particularly helpful is this 2020 review that pooled all data, I'm reading now, on mental health chatbots available at that time, concluded that, while the bots, quote, have the potential to improve mental health, there wasn't enough evidence to definitively conclude this, and studies so far have a high risk of bias and conflicting results. It's creating the illusion of help, says, it's an S with a cedilla at the bottom. I have no idea how that affects that pronunciation. E-R-I-F-E, Sharif, perhaps? Tekin, T-E-K-I-N, an assistant professor of philosophy and medical humanities at the University of Texas, San Antonio. So, well, you know, this suicide study, which is only partly chatbot based, potentially a vector that may be helping some people. It seems like that we don't have any good empirical evidence that mental health chatbots are actually helpful at all, which, you know, as someone who is a big fan of empirical evidence, I find concerning, particularly that a lot of these are products and are making claims. And something that this article brought up is that it's really an unregulated space, right? So well, a lot of companies can make a lot of claims that they are unable to back up without really big negative consequences at this point. So my big takeaway from this would be, you know, buyer beware. And also the data harvesting that some of these apps is doing is unconscionable. So be aware of that as well. All right, next up. So this is a tweet by Emily Bender at Emily M. Bender, who is a professor at the University of Washington, who, you know, I know personally. That was where I went to grad school. Talked to Emily many times, just to reveal any potential conflict of interest there. Also one of the, you know, I would say key researchers in the ML ethics space, and especially NLP ethics. And she is responding to this snippet. So the snippet reads, on Thursday, a machine testified before Congress, which is not true. Jack Clark, the British founder of Anthropic, a San Francisco artificial intelligence startup, was in Washington to give testimony on retaining America's leading role in new technologies. At the end of his comments, he read out a paragraph written by a language program his company had developed. When he informed the senators of his trick, Senator Maria Cantwell responded, "Do you want to explain that?" And what Emily is pointing out here is that claiming that a machine testified here is incorrect, right? So to read Emily's response, it is irresponsible for Jack to claim that it did, and for this reporter to repeat that claim with no distance or skepticism in the Sunday Times. So thinking back to the summary of related work in the AI snake oil pitfalls of AI journalism, right, which again partially draws on Emily's work, Emily Bender's work. This would probably be a good example of, I don't know which one of these it would really fall under. Well, definitely uncritically platforming those with self-interest. It may surprise you to know that AI startup founders would probably prefer that there was less legislation and rules that they had to follow around the use of their technology, because that might harm their profits. And also probably the human one, so like flawed human AI comparison, right? A false comparison between AI tools and humans that implies that AI tools and humans are similar in how they learn and perform is probably what I would identify as the, oh wait, nope, wrong one, sorry. Nope. Yes. Is probably how I would quantify that. And again, very high visibility and very misleading, right? This was a generated and then, you know, cherry-picked example. I probably personally would not have read generated text in a legal setting where I personally would have been liable for perjury for anything incorrect said by it, but there you go. Yep. So as Emily says, these are category errors. Language models are computer programs designed to model the distribution of word forms and text and nothing more. They don't have convictions or personal knowledge and aren't the sort of entity that can be bound by oath. So we talked a little bit about moral agents, right? Very clearly, you gotta be human to be a moral agent, right? Usually the term that people use is adult sane human. So someone who is in, you know, possession of their full faculties and also old enough to know better, and obviously that is not a thing that models can do. So in this case, I'd say that this is misleading and was not a great thing to have done. And in his defense, Jack Clark then walked back his sort of statement, quoting him, "Might as well be precise as possible. Believe this marks the first time a paragraph output from a language model has been used in part of human testimony in the US Senate." So very much a different claim from a computer testified before Congress. Anyway. Alexi says, I'm definitely going on your enemy list for CBT chatbots. I mean, I think it's important to be truthful and careful with the technology that we build. Robbie says, I don't think AI can solve this type of problem. So talking about mental health chatbots, even if we reach the singularity, which people have been predicting it, 10 years from now for, many decades. They've all been wrong. It's an evergreen problem. Yeah, I mean, it may shock people to hear this, but human emotions are not a simple problem to be solved, right? Who was it who... I'm trying to remember who it was, but some psychologists got the Nobel Prize in economics, I want to say, because they brought like foundational ideas of psychology, like humans are not purely rational actors, into the field. Someone was mentioning that recently. I'm not that familiar with the research program, but it seems relevant. All right, next up. Oh, no, we already talked about this one. Next up. This one. Awful. Hate it. I'm just going to warn you right now. Very disturbing. So this is from the Authoritarian Tech newsletter by Coda Story. This one is written by Frankie Vetch, VETCH, from October 4th. And the headline is, Israel uses Palestine as a lab to test surveillance tech. And it is an interview with Fatafta, apologies if I'm saying that incorrectly, I'm reading here, a Middle East North African policy manager at the digital rights group Access Now. I should say Access Now is a rights group that I follow quite a bit and generally tend to like their stuff. And a policy analyst at the think tank Al-Shabaka, which I'm less familiar with, which seeks to educate and foster public debate on Palestinian human rights and self-determination. Coda Story spoke with her to learn more about Israel's use of surveillance technology in Palestine, and it's a long conversation, but I think the sort of the core of this, or sort of one of the clearest, like, clear misuses, well, I'll just read this. It was revealed late last month, reading here, that the Israeli government had installed an AI-controlled gun at a military checkpoint on the busy Al-Shahada Street in the Palestinian city of Hebron, which is, like, this is the nightmare scenario, right? A colonizing power using AI to automate and scale violence against, marginalized people. That's it. That's the thing I hate most, right? And yeah, I'll post the link in the chat if you would like to read it. I mean, obviously a very harrowing read about some of the travails of the Palestinian people, and how AI and surveillance and automation are making them worse. But like, it's important to know, right? It's important to be informed, and it's really rough. Citation needed. Alexi said, emotions are easier to solve than higher functions because we share it with a lot of animals. That's out of the scope of this discussion. I don't think you're correct there. And so you may be saying, like, well, okay, but this is, computer vision. What about NLP and speech technology? How does that relate? And I think that this is a good example of a similar situation without the use of automation, that the use of automation would make worse, right? So this is a tweet from Dr. Angus Grieve-Smith at GRVSMTH at Twitter. Responding to a quote tweet from Afro Latino Travel on October 3rd, which I'm reading in part here. The murderers identified their targets as Haitians by an inability to pronounce properly the Spanish word P-E-R-E-J-I-L. I don't actually know how to say that. Peril, maybe? No, wait, no, it's Spanish. Peril? Peril? I don't know. I probably would not have been identified as Haitian, but I certainly would not have been identified as Spanish. for parsley. Historians estimated that 15,000 to 30,000 victims perish. As news leaked, international concern followed. Dr. Grieve-Smith here says, in the wrong context, accent discrimination can escalate to mass murder. 15,000 to 30,000 people killed in the Dominican Republic, identified by their accents in a replication of the Shibboleth mass murder only 85 years ago this week at Accentism Project, right? So this is a clear example where linguistic discrimination is being used to target individuals for, again, genocide. And if you're not familiar with the concept of shibboleth or what the Shibboleth mass murder was, so this is, I want to say it's from the Bible, but shibboleth is a word that was easy for one group of people to say given their language variety, and difficult for another group of people to say, and if you said it right, you lived, and if you didn't, you were identified as a member of that other group and you were killed. So that's the sort of general idea. Another famous example of a shibboleth is the word squirrel in, I believe, both World Wars I and II, where inability to say squirrel correctly was used to identify Germans by particularly American and English troops. So, at least to me, the, relationship between automated weapons and identifying people as members of a group by their language use is pretty clear, particularly in a mass surveillance situation. So this particular example is a big reason why I suggest, or strongly suggest, that you don't build category detectors, right? So if you're working with, let's say, African American English, I would not recommend building a this person uses African American English detector, right? Because that has a clear secondary use. And you may be like, well, in the current political climate, being a member of a certain group isn't actually that bad, or I'm not worried about that. But I would say that you can't know how, political situations will escalate, and particularly in, a multilingual or, a situation where you have lots of different groups together and linguistic features may be used to identify members of a specific group. Always assume the worst, right? One big thing that separates language data from other types of data is that, setting aside the relatively new thing of, large-scale language generation, all language data is definitionally human data, right? It is definitionally produced by and tied to the specific human beings that produced it. That is not the case for things like image data, right? Like an image of a pumpkin can look exactly the same if two people take it with the same equipment, right? But saying image of a pumpkin, even that word, even that little text of speech is going to be informative about the person who produced that language. It'll be informative in speech, it'll be informative in text, it'll be informative in sign, and it will contain social information about that person. And it's irreducible. There is no way to remove social information from individuals, about individuals from their language use. You just cannot do it. And as a result, if you are not very careful in the problems, the things that you design and create, like the effects of systems that are based on language data are always going to directly affect humans because the data always come directly from humans, if that makes sense. So yeah, just be careful, right? Be careful, be paranoid, protect your users, protect, your data donors. We as language technologists have, the great privilege of being able to build language technology, right? But also a lot of, I would argue, responsibilities towards the people who will be affected by that technology. And again, we talked about it, like, coming up, you may be personally legally liable in the EU. Potentially in the future, you may be personally legally liable in a lot of places, but setting that aside, regardless of legal liability, I hope that you have come to the field because you, as I say at the beginning of my streams, care about other people, because all language technology is about other people. All language technology is about people. It is irreducible. It is irremovable. There's nothing you can do to extract the human from the language or the language from the human. They are linked irreconcilably. Yeah, anyway, just a little rant, just something to think about, and yeah, keep in mind, particularly in a time of rising global authoritarianism. And my final one in the ethics section, so this is interesting. So this is a news story from Engadget by S. Dent, at STEVETDENT, October 3rd, 2022. And the headline is Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, and Google. You may be like, Rachel, that's all of the tech companies. It's many of them. To improve speech recognition for people with disabilities. Subtitle, The Speech Accessibility Project aims to help people with Down syndrome, Parkinson's, and more. So this, I think, is really interesting. I think it has the potential to be really valuable. So people who have a variety. There are lots of diseases and disabilities, and also just sort of like cognitive differences that affect people's language output, right? Like we were just talking about, the human and the language are, you know, very closely connected to each other. And part of that is the medical condition of the human who is producing the language. And that can include writing, that can include typing, that can include signing, that can include speaking. It includes all the language used together. Whistling for the whistled languages. And historically, people who have a disease or disability that affects their language production have had a harder time using language technology. And I am tentatively optimistic about this project. I think increasing accessibility, fantastic. Love to see it. 10 out of 10 across the board. Love accessibility, particularly for people who, you know, we're all going to be disabled one day, is the best case scenario. To be clear, for each of us, there will be a day upon which we are disabled. Not for all of us, there is a single day upon which all of us will be disabled. That would be something. Just want to clear up that scope ambiguity there. But for each of us, there's a day upon which we will be disabled. And increasing accessibility, you know, helps everybody. So I'm a huge fan of it. I think it's very important. And I think that particularly helping people who have issues using speech recognition has the potential to be very powerful and make their lives very, you know, way better. My only concern here is that a lot of these corporate interests who are invested in this project, my worry is that they may be potentially building disease detectors, right? For example, Parkinson's, a lot of work on sort of diagnostics using speech data has been done on Parkinson's and detecting Parkinson's and diagnosing Parkinson's, even without somebody's knowledge or consent, is kind of doable, unfortunately. So my one big worry here is people's medical data being inferred without their permission. But on the other hand, I think if there is informed consent, this could be really powerful and really helpful. So keep an eye on this. Keep my eye on you. All right, that is all the ethics stuff. Wow. That was a heavy ethics section, especially like, I don't know. I've been just, especially recently, very worried about people living under authoritarian regimes in, you know, around the world. Recently, of course, thinking a lot about Iran and the Iranian people. So yeah, anyway, fun stuff. Let's give ourselves some total whiplash and take it up a shot. Hail, player. Yeah. Lexi says, my grandma wasn't able to use any keyboard inputs. ASR would be great for, yeah, definitely. I think both ASR and also chatbots, honestly, have the potential to really increase accessibility for folks, assuming they work. That's the issue, right? All right, first fun thing. I thought this was really interesting. So this is a tweet from @Ty101, Ricker Dockham. There's IPA for Ricker, but not for the Dockham DOCKUM. Apologies if I'm saying that wrong. Do IPA for the whole name, please. And the tweet is, the first Thai printing press arrived in Siam in 1835, and by 1839, almost 1 million pages had been printed, mostly translated excerpts of the New Testament. Also in 1939, Baptists reported a total of 9 converts. Not for that year, overall, an impressive level of disinterest, which I think is fascinating. I also find it extremely funny to think about a bunch of missionaries going and trying their best and just really not making much headway. To be clear, I'm not a huge fan of missionaries in general. I think that they have done a lot of direct harm. Also very tied into the history of linguistics. I feel like I should be upfront about that. A lot of early linguistic documentation work in particular, and also, to be very frank, ongoing linguistic documentation work has been done by Christian missionaries with the explicit aim of conversion, which I'm not a huge fan of. Speaking of, imperialism, colonialism, etc. But yeah, that's really interesting. So Thai, of course, has a non-Latin alphabet, and just interesting about the history of printing there. All right. Next up that I thought was just fun and interesting. This is a tweet from @culturaltutor. No more information about this particular source, but the tweet itself is from October 4th, and it's gone, I'd say, semi-viral. It has 56,000 likes and 11,000 retweets, and it is a brief history of your favorite fonts. And so I'll post the link if you want to scroll through it. I thought it was interesting. I don't know how accurate any of this information is. I would definitely, double check it, but for the fonts that I actually did know about, it seemed to more or less match up, so probably okay. Times New Roman, of course, commissioned by the Times newspaper in Britain in 1931, an update to the spindly 19th century typeface used at the time. Used to be the standard computer font until it was replaced by Calibri, certainly for Windows machines, only developed in the early 2000s. Arial designed in 1892 specifically for the consumer electronics industry. I'm not going to go through all of these, but this one was the one that really struck out for me. Garamond, which is a serifed font. I don't know, how would you describe Garamond? It looks sort of classy. It looks like the sort of font you'd use for wedding invitations, I guess. I don't know. A classic book font named after the 16th century engraver Claude Garamond. One of the oldest fonts still in regular use. It was originally based on a typeface from 1495, so like well early into the era of printing. It has been reinterpreted many times, but still retains an elegant, almost handwritten look. So really printed, really pretty font, and an interesting history of it that I don't know for sure is true, but sounds interesting. And finally, we'll end on a little joke from Joseph Fruhold. Joseph says, I'm an alpha male. I use transparency to deal with overplotting. So if you're familiar with ggplot2, alpha is the parameter that you use to adjust the transparency of an image. So if you're putting things on top of each other, you would adjust the alpha to change the transparency. A little joke for you. So that is all that I had from you for you today. And before we wrap up, I would like to take a quick moment to thank my monthly coffee supporters, including Ryan W., who is new this week. Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate all of you. You make it possible. Well, I'm still not getting paid, but I'm not paying to work, so I appreciate that. Yes, if you are a monthly supporter, you have already gotten the links for today. I got them out before the stream, which I'm delighted to report to you. And if you're interested in joining them, my coffee is ko-fi dash? Yeah, it's a dash. Well, one of the little sideways ones. It looks like the middle line of an E. That's a dash. .com/RCTATMAN. So, yeah. Oh, Alexi says, people approached me on the streets of South Korea. They asked me from where I'm from at some point. I said, Russia. They pulled out a tablet, pressed some buttons. A speech about Jesus played in Russian. Fascinating. Oh, I'm glad you're learning a lot. Thank you, Docking AI. I appreciate you. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining today, everybody. Next Tuesday, I probably won't have a live stream, but I will have something, hopefully. Again, if everything goes according to plan. I know I'm being a bit cagey about this, but I'm very excited about it, and I don't want to promise it, and then, you know, something goes wrong and I can't deliver it, but I'm very excited. And then we'll be back on next Thursday for our next coffee chat. Also, this is now available as a podcast on Spotify. So if you search for Coffee Chat Machine Learning NLP Week in Review, I also put it on my Twitter. You can listen to it as a podcast. And hopefully my voice interpreting was good enough. But feel free to leave me feedback if it was difficult to follow just listening to it. And I'll take that into account. So thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.